So, welcome to everyone who has joined us, whether you are joining us in Newcastle or online via Zoom. I am Louise Reeve, I am a lay worship leader, and today is our Holocaust. But if you can't see it, you will be able to follow without it. We are recording the service. So, I will soon light the chalice, but first let me begin, as we always begin at Newcastle on Time Unitarians, with our statement of the values we hold in common. Though we may hold many different beliefs, as a community, these are the values we share. We welcome all who seek the meaning of life and who believe that human spirituality is wider than any one tradition and deeper than any one set of opinions. With the respect for our Christian origins, we seek to explore truths from all sources. Our fellowship gives us strength and encouragement in daily living. Let me light our chalice. Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls murdered during the Holocaust. In the horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocides which followed, we recognise the destructive prejudices that can drive people apart. Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity, and hatred of others just because they are different to us. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious manifestations of the divine and can know the courage to face the darkness. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering so that light can banish darkness, love will prevail over hate, and good will triumph over evil. Amen. An introduction to Holocaust Memorial Day. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust organises annual remembrance events. These words are their introduction to the annual Holocaust Memorial Day. Friends, thank you for joining us. Your attendance is part of the national picture of Holocaust Memorial Day, with thousands of activities taking place across the UK, supported by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. We know that everyone who attends Holocaust Memorial Day events learns more, empathises more deeply, and often goes on to take action in community. Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January is the annual International Day to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of people killed under Nazi persecution of other groups, including but not limited to Roma and Sinti people, disabled people, Black people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and gay people. Holocaust Memorial Day is also the day to remember those murdered in more recent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. Holocaust Memorial Day is a time when we seek to learn the lessons of the past and recognise that genocide does not just take place on its own. It's a steady process which can begin if discrimination, racism, and hatred are not checked and prevented. We are fortunate here in the UK, we are not at immediate risk of genocide. However, discrimination has not ended, nor has the use of language of hatred or exclusion. There is still much to do to create a safer future, and events such as this one today are an opportunity to start this process. Every day, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust selects a theme for Holocaust Memorial Day, and this year it is Fragility of Freedom. They say, as we come together this Holocaust Memorial Day, we have a chance to reflect on how fragile and vulnerable freedom is, pledge not to take our freedoms for granted, and consider what we can do to strengthen freedom around the world. The theme reminds us that genocides never just happen. They begin as a subtle, slow process where those who are targeted for persecution have their freedom restricted and removed before many of them are murdered. This is the story of the Holocaust survivor Eli Wiesel. Eliza Eli Wiesel was born in 1928 in the small Romanian town of Sikel. He was the third of 4 children and the only son. He was 15 when, in spring 1944, German troops occupied Sikhet. Soon after, he was moved with the rest of his family into one of the 2 ghettos created in the town. When both ghettos were liquidated, the entire Jewish population of Sikhet was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. At the selection of Birkenau, Wiesel was separated from his mother and sisters. This was the last time he ever saw his mother and his younger sister, Sephora. Men to the left, women to the right. 8 words spoken quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 simple, short words. Yet that was the moment when I left my mother. On the advice of an existing inmate, Wiesel lied about his age, claiming to be 18 to avoid being selected for extermination. Decades later, Wiesel recorded his feelings during his first hours in Auschwitz. Never shall I forget that night, the first night of the camp, that turned my life into one long night 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. After helping for some time at Auschwitz I, Wiesel and his father were transferred to Monowitz, sometimes known as Buna, a work camp that made up part of the extensive Auschwitz camp complex. There he worked as a slave labourer. The loss of his mother and sister and the daily brutality of the camp led Wiesel to question his faith. My eyes had opened and I was alone, terribly alone in a world without God, without man. Without love or mercy, I was nothing but ashes now. As the Russian army advanced through Poland in the early months of 1945, the Germans evacuated Auschwitz-Birkenau. Wiesel and his father marched for miles on foot before being transported to Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany, where his father died. Wiesel was liberated from Buchenwald on the 11th of April 1945. After liberation, he was reunited with his older sisters, Beatrice and Hilda, in a French orphanage. He went on to study in Paris and became a journalist. For a decade after the Holocaust, he kept silent about his experiences until a French journalist, Francois Mauriac, persuaded him to write. The result was Night, his acclaimed memoir, published for the first time in French in 1958. The book has been translated into over 30 languages, and Wiesel went on to write over 60 books of fiction and non-fiction. He moved to the US in the 1950s and married in 1969. He had a son, Elisha, in 1972. Appointed as the first chair of the President's Commission on the Holocaust in 1976, Wiesel initiated Days of Remembrance, the United States' annual commemoration of the Holocaust. At the Day of Remembrance ceremony in 2003, he spoke of the importance of commemoration. All the rivers run to the sea, days come and go, generations vanish, others are born. What does one do with the memory of agony and suffering? To remember means to lend an ethical dimension to all endeavours and aspirations. He returned to Auschwitz-Birkenau for the first time as part of his work with the President's Commission and wrote about the visit in his memoir, And the Sea is Never Full. Birkenau, I had not realised that the camp was quite small. It has swallowed an entire people, a people with hopes and memories. Wiesel was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. The citation for the award said, "His message is one of peace and atonement and human dignity." The message is in the form of a testimony, repeated and deepened through the works of a great author. He died in 2016. And now, let us pray. prayer of those who remember by Reverend Paul Oakley. God of our hearts, God of our understandings, God who gives us hope and inspires us to commitment, God who commands us to remember. We come together today with hearts contrite and broken. We come together with minds awake, comprehension striving against incomprehension. We come together in hope, growing in the fertile soil of our dedication to prevent future atrocities. We come remembering all those lost past hatred and indifference. We feel deeply the call to remember those lost in camps and ghettos, in streets and forests. Their sheer number leaves us reeling. Each one was truly a unique world of possibility forever lost to us. We also feel the call to honour the lives and legacies of those who survived. May we learn to carry their worlds that were cut short. May we turn from apathy and prevent the growth of hatred and inequity. May we become worthy of the duty of remembrance that is ours. May we never forget them. Let us make this world a place where the cry, never again, is not uttered in vain. And in promise that the people say together, Amen. As well we know, events like the Holocaust, though we say never again, have happened many times throughout history. This reading is Surviving the Rwandan Genocide by Marie Chantal Umahoro. She is known as Chantal, and she survived the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Marie Chantal Umahoro, known as Chantal, was born into a large family in the northern part of Rwanda. She was the oldest of 8 children, growing up in a very happy home. Their father was a well-respected local educator who had taught many of the local community. People often told him how much they had enjoyed being in his lessons. However, Chantal's family were different from their neighbours. They were the only Tutsi family in a village of Hutus. At primary school, Chantal felt isolated from the other children, who were all Hutus. They would not mix with her or include her in their games. She remembers them calling her names such as cockroach or snake. Even the teachers subjected her to discrimination, asking all of the Tutsis in the room to stand, knowing that Chantal was the only one. They treated her unfairly. No matter how hard she studied, she knew that her work had to be better than her peers to receive the same recognition. On the 6th of April 1994, news came through that the Rwandan president had been assassinated. The president was a Hutu, and fearing there would be dangerous consequences for the Tutsi community, Chantal's brother warned his family that this is the end for all of us. The following day, Rwandan radio told everyone to stay indoors for their own safety. In reality, it meant the Tutsis would be at home when the killing began that night. Tutsis quickly became the target of the Interahamwe, a militia group backed by the government. Chantal's family were often woken up in the middle of night by the sound of Interahamwe banging on the door. They would never answer it. On the 14th of April, the knocking was so loud that Chantal's mother decided to answer the door. The men pushed her mother to the floor and demanded to see Alexis and Chantal's brother, Kizito. They searched the house, found Chantal hiding under the bed, and beat her. Her brothers had been hiding in separate houses in the compound, but when they heard the noise, they gave themselves up in the hope the attackers would leave their mother and sister alone. They dragged Chantal and her brothers out into the street, where they were beating other Tutsis to death. The leader of the group of Interahamwe told the others to start killing all the men. Chantal felt helpless watching the merciless killing around her. Her brothers were beaten with heavy pieces of wood until they fell to the floor, then attacked with machetes. Chantal remembers lying on the floor and thinking how the murderers looked like they were enjoying inflicting all this pain and suffering on their victims. These painful memories stay with her today. The militia told the women to go back home, and they said they would come for them later. Everyone was terrified in the town. Chantal's mother and niece hid with a family friend who was a Hutu, but they decided it would be too risky for Chantal to. Instead, she hid in the bushes nearby. Soon after, she was taken in by another Hutu neighbour called Edith. Edith's husband thought it was too dangerous, but she insisted, saying she's going nowhere. When the militia came nearby, Chantal hid in the bushes again, while Edith's children kept watch. At the time, she said, we had given up hope of living. When I was hiding, I didn't know what was day or night. It was just a matter of sitting there and waiting to be killed. Under the constant threat of discovery, Edith decided to move her family to a town in central Rwanda, where they would be safer. The journey was dangerous, but Edith helped them all get there safely by hiding them in the back of a car. In their new home, Chantal once again hid in the bushes if there were searches taking place. One day, while she was hiding, soldiers surrounded the bush. She felt sure she would be killed. Two men in uniforms approached her and told her to come to them. They identified themselves as RPF, Rwandan Patriotic Front soldiers, reassuring her and saying, you are safe. After the genocide, she was overjoyed to find her mother had survived, though more than 50 members of her family had been killed. But Chantal felt that Rwanda was not her home anymore. So in February 1995, she went to join her sister, who had been living in London. Chantal was taken in by nuns, who gave her a place to live while she applied for asylum. She made her home in the UK, she has a family and is training to be a social worker. She said, moving to the UK, I found a home. I found a home because it was secure, there was no fear. Chantal didn't speak about her experiences for 20 years, until her daughters asked her about her life in Rwanda. Today, she speaks to many different groups to help them understand the genocide and is the deputy chair of an organisation which helps other survivors of genocide and also works to raise awareness of the genocide against Tutsis in Rwanda. She goes back regularly to Rwanda because she says that something has changed there now. She says it is more like home again. Let us now take a couple of minutes for silent prayer and reflection. After that, we will have musical interlude. When you sit down to write an address for Holocaust Memorial Day, it's hard not to reach for the cliches. If someone were to ask you at the checkout in the supermarket, what do you think about the Holocaust? What would you say? It was awful. It was hideous. It was appalling and must never happen again, perhaps. All of these things are, of course, entirely true. What else can we say? And yet we know it has happened again. Certainly genocidal events happened before the Holocaust, although it was not until the industrial era that such efficient and bureaucratic slaughter should be carried out so effectively. And as we heard earlier in our second reading, since the end of the Second World War, similar events have happened in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and we can no doubt think of other less well-known events in which the urge felt by one type of people to try to exterminate another type of people resulted in bloody death. We heard earlier accounts from a survivor of the Rwandan genocide in 1994, and I found myself returning to Fergal Keen's work, and in particular his writings on the Rwanda genocide, which he reported on for the BBC in 1994. Those of you who were here for our New Home service a couple of weeks ago might remember that David did a reading from him on his thoughts on St. Patrick's Day in China. These are his thoughts on his reporting from the Rwandan genocide. A letter from Africa. Below the village of Rusumo, the river Kagera flows into a steep ravine that forms the natural border between Tanzania and Rwanda. There is a small waterfall where the river narrows before entering the gorge. In the rainy season, the river swells and thickens with brown upland silt. As it sweeps down from the highlands, it gathers into its currents huge clumps of elephant grass and numerous small trees. These are then swept and tossed across the Rusumo Falls before settling into the calmer waters on the Tanzanian side. In the late spring of 1994, it was much the same story with human corpses. They too twisted and turned, rose and dropped, and came bouncing over the falls before they found the still water which would carry them slowly down to Lake Victoria. Of course, at first, they did not look dead to me. They looked like swimmers, because the strong currents invested them with powers of movement that seemed temporarily to deny the fact of their mortality. In fact, so lifelike did they appear, that for a few moments I winced as I watched them thrown against the rocks, imagining the pain they must be feeling. It was only beyond the falls, where they floated lifeless among the trees and grass, that one could accept the certainty of death. I watched this from the bridge. The border guards told me people had been floating through in their hundreds every day for weeks. Many had their hands tied behind their backs. The genocide of the Tutsis had been progressing at a fearsome rate for more than a month. By the time it would finish, up to 1 million people would be dead. Consider the mathematics of this horror. In 100 days, 1 million people. In the days before the Rwandan Patriotic Front arrived at Rusumo to take action and try to stop the slaughter, 250,000 refugees had fled across the bridge. They would, of course, have seen the bodies flowing past, and many among these refugees, the Hutu refugees, would have taken some part in the slaughter. But this genocide was a crime of mass complicity, a neighbourly slaughter in which killer and victim inevitably knew each other. Just before the bridge lay a huge pile of machetes and axes, dumped there as the refugees escaped towards Tanzania. I leaned across the bridge and noticed that 2 bodies had become lodged in the rocks at the side of the gorge. One was that of a man. The other was that of a baby between 6 or 12 months old. I saw that the child had been killed with a machete, a gash across its head. It did not seem like a real child, it looked like a doll. Or perhaps it would be more truthful to say that I did not want to accept it as a child. It was easier for my eyes to tell me that it was made of plastic. I looked again and of course knew that further back along the river, perhaps 50 to 100 miles further back, an adult had taken the machete and ended the life of the child and then hurled it into the water. I sat back from the bridge and felt like being sick. Closing my eyes, I could hear the sound of the water rushing through the gorge, and beyond us in Tanzania, the noise of cattle being herded along the grasslands. They were normal sounds and they helped me get my control back. I kept my eyes closed and, gripping the rails of the bridge, I made my way back to our car in the manner of a blind man. I did not want to look back at the river to see it ever again, and on the journey north to Kigali, where the war still raged, I kept asking myself the same kind of question. What kind of man would kill a baby? What kind of man? Keane referred to Rwanda as a spiritually damaging place, saying that the sights he had seen when reporting on the genocide had left him feeling as though the belief he had once held in a world where good would eventually triumph over evil had been destroyed. As such, he sought to ask himself the question we've just heard. What kind of man would do such a thing? Perhaps then, when we think about the Holocaust, we must ask ourselves a much harder question that we instinctively shy away from. What would it take to get me to do that? All of us instinctively feel for the victims. And we want to believe that we would be an Edith who hid marry Chantal or Mara Boro, or meet Gibbs, who in the Second World War cared for, looked after Anne Frank and her family. But would we? Dr. Gregory Stanton, the founding president of the Genocide Watch organisation, concluded from his research into how and why genocide happens that there are 10 stages to it. The first process is classification, when we classify the world into us versus them. The second is symbolisation, when we give names to those classifications like Jew and Aryan, Hutu and Tutsi, Turk and Armenian, Bengali and Pashtun. Sometimes the symbols are physical, like the Nazi yellow star. The third is discrimination, when laws and customs prevent groups of people from exercising their full rights as citizens or as human beings. The fourth is dehumanization, when perpetrators call their victims rats or cockroaches or cancer or disease. Portraying them as non-human makes eliminating them a cleansing of the society rather than murder. These first four processes taken together result in what James Waller calls othering. The fifth process is organisation, when hate groups, armies and militias organise. The sixth is polarisation, when moderates are targeted who could stop the process of division, especially moderates from the perpetrator. The seventh process is preparation, when plans for killing and deportation are made by leaders and perpetrators are trained and armed. The eighth process is persecution, when victims are identified, arrested, transported and concentrated into prisons, ghettos or concentration camps, where they are tortured and murdered. The ninth process is extermination, what lawyers define as genocide. The intentional destruction in whole or in part of a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Dr. Stanton writes, when I outlined the stages of genocide in a memo I wrote in 1996, I realised that there is another final process in every genocide. The 10th stage is denial. Denial is a continuation of a genocide because it is a continuing attempt to destroy the victim group psychologically and culturally, to deny its members even the memory of the murders of their relatives. Keane commented, if you scratch below the surface of the Rwandan genocide, you will find not a simple issue of tribal hatred, but a complex web of politics, economics, history, psychology, and the struggle for identity. This was not something I realised when I was dispatched to Rwanda. Like many of my colleagues, I drove in from Uganda, believing that the short, stocky ones had simply decided to turn on the tall, thin ones, because that was the way it had always been. Yet now, 2 years later, when I ask the question, what kind of man, I think, a man who was conditioned by the preachings of powerful men. Men who said that the survival of the Hutus depended on the death of small Tutsi children, who said, don't repeat the mistakes of the 1950s, because little Tutsis go into adult Tutsis and they plan to make slaves of Hutus. What happened in Rwanda, Keane writes, was the result of cynical manipulation by powerful political and military leaders. Faced with the choice of sharing some of their wealth and power, they chose to vilify the group who wanted to share. They told the impoverished Hutu peasantry that the Tutsis planned to take their land. They summoned up memories of the colonial days when Tutsi overlordship had guaranteed second-class citizenship of Hutus. The Tutsis were characterised as vermin, cockroaches who should be stamped on. There were powerful echoes of Hitler's Germany and the demonisation of Jews. In much the same way as the Nazis exploited latent anti-Semitism in Germany, so did the forces of Hutu extremism identify and whip into murderous frenzy the historical sense of grievance against the Tutsis. I focused today somewhat on the Rwandan genocide, partly because Rwanda has been in the news much in our own country. Our government apparently is looking at deporting people there, despite the fact at the same time we are accepting asylum seekers from there. I do not even pretend to understand the logic of this. But thinking further Keen's comments about anti-Semitism and the Nazi Holocaust, which is of course the originator of Holocaust Memorial Day, I think back even further in time, Jesus was no stranger to a world of racial persecution and sectarianism. In a world of vicious infighting between religious factions, all of whom were opposed in turn by the overpowering might of the Roman Empire, he knew persecution himself. We all know the mocking placard the Romans hung over his head on the cross. Here is the King of the Jews. I wonder if we always appreciate a particular dimension to the parable of the Good Samaritan. That the Samaritan was not merely kind-hearted, but the type of person who Jews, Jesus' audience, would have viewed as the other. The sort of person that they would never want to accept help. That truly was the radical message of Jesus' teaching, that to love God is to step away from all which divides us, race, culture, nationality, and accept the fundamental humanity we all share. And he acknowledged that it came at a cost. Edith, who tried to protect Marie Chantal, whose reading we heard earlier, risked her own safety and to a certain extent that of her family's, to try to shelter a young girl who had been killed. Mukis, who sheltered Anne Frank and her family, also put her own life at risk and had to find food for around over 2 years at a time of very strict rationing. She had to find enough food for an entire family and somehow get it and smuggle it to Anne Frank and the other people hiding in the secret barracks. And indeed, the Good Samaritan risked his own safety, delayed his journey, and spent a considerable sum of money to rescue the man who had been attacked by robbers. Jesus, of course, paid a much higher price. Fergal Keene answered his question, what kind of man can kill a child like this? What kind of man? Anyone at all. Not a psychopath, not an actual born killer. A man born without prejudice or hatred. A man not born to hate, but who has learned hatred. A man like you or me. You might, like me, have recognised some of the steps in Dr. Stanton's list of the 10 stages of genocide. I think that what lies before all of us to acknowledge on Holocaust Memorial Day is to recognise them and challenge them. I do not think that our own country is at immediate risk of experiencing genocide. I certainly hope not. But some of those steps sound chillingly familiar. And even when a country stops short of going beyond those first 4 steps of othering, enormous harm can be caused to innocent human beings. Thus I believe we know the challenge before us, to go forth in fellowship and love. The road is not easy, but for the sake of the 6 million who died in the Holocaust and the innumerable others who have died before and since, we must walk this path together and never forget. I will put out the physical flame of our chalice, but its light burns within us until we gather once more. And our closing words. Go in peace, seeking justice, by Jim Begor. When I say, go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say, go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say, go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace, seeking justice. I mean go in peace, committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean Go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace, may it be so. Amen.